big impact on the fashion industry and fashion history at large. Huge thanks to the entire team at the Dutch Fashion Foundation for everything that they do. For me, in this project specifically, they were able to provide me with some really good information about designers that I was familiar with. I've actually covered a few of these Dutch designers before, but the DFF team was able to provide me with a lot of resources so that I could come to a more holistic understanding of contemporary Dutch fashion. So, thank you for that, and also huge thanks to the Dutch Fashion Foundation for supporting the incredible talent that comes out of their country. Organizations like DFF play such a huge part in amplifying the voices of designers and sometimes directly supporting them in an outright way. So, I don't know, there's no replacement for what this organization does, so it's huge thanks to them. There's a lesson that the fashion industry has to learn every few years, and then we seem to promptly forget it right after we learn it, and that's that fashion can truly come from anywhere. In the 80s, the fashion industry reluctantly accepted Japanese designers to show in Paris and found that they were some of the most groundbreaking designers working at the time. In the 90s, the fashion industry was shocked to find that there was such outstanding talent that was coming out of the Royal Academy in Belgium. And even now, the fashion industry is having to relearn the lesson all over again with Nigerian designers like Maolola and South African designers like Tebe Magugu and Chinese designers like Hamkus and Gualpe. The idea that good fashion design can only come from Paris, London, Milan, and New York. This idea has been tested over and over, and we keep finding that it isn't true. Fashion can truly come from anywhere. And I was a little bit discouraged when I was supplied with the wealth of information that DFF provided for me about Dutch designers, that for the past 40, 50 years, a lot of times Dutch designers were overshadowed by their contemporaries who were making sometimes middling work. There are, of course, exceptions to that. Iris van Herpen and Victor and Rolf are often hailed as huge innovators in the world of couture, but it does seem that Dutch fashion often gets ignored, right? Okay, here's the deal. Keep making good art. That problem that I described, that is a real problem. But this is the best time in history to thwart the expectations and show your true art. Keep pushing yourself and keep making incredible things, and people will find it. Find your footing, keep digging into it, keep exploring, keep reimagining, keep self-correcting. I found this Dutch saying while I was reading through all these resources that they sent me, and apparently this saying transliterates into, just be normal, then you are crazy enough. I absolutely love that. And I think that's reflected so much in the way that Dutch designers execute their art. There is such a strangeness and an otherworldliness to it, but it doesn't seem like something that is put on. It always feels like we're getting very honest insight into the artist's mind. Looking back, we see Ronald van der Kemp pioneering ethical luxury, one of the first in the industry to not waste materials and to make full use out of everything that he was given in order to make a collection, but still making clothes that were inherently desirable and that resonated with people. Boss Kolsters diving in and fully creating an entire universe through his work, not just creating collections of pretty clothes, but truly fleshing everything out until every detail was addressed and you really felt like you were in this alternate universe that he had created. We have leaders like Monique van Heist who looked at the way that the fashion system was done, where every 6 months you had to come out with a brand new collection of clothes, and she rejected that idea and decided to do things on her own terms, having instead a single collection of clothes that she would continue to innovate on. We have outstanding designers like Iris van Herpen, who might be the single best storyteller in all of fashion currently working. And someone who makes such beautiful work that it almost doesn't need any kind of setup or backstory to it in order to just look at it and say, wow, what a beautiful dress. You have brands like You As Me and Me As You, which encompass this idea of radical inclusivity. And other brands that completely rejected the fashion system like G+N, where they stepped away from the idea of doing runways in the 90s and instead decided to focus solely on making outstanding, good, creative product. We have designers like Neil Clavers, who not only headed up his eponymous brand with Astrid van Angelen, but also went on to become a leader in fashion at his alma mater. We see brands like Alexander von Schlober who introduce these striking, memorable, wonderful shapes for clothing. We see designers like Victor and Rolf who continue to set the standard and the shape for the language of haute couture. These and countless other native Dutch designers and graduates of Dutch design schools have made massive contributions to the history of what we know as fashion. And if there's something to take away from this video, let it be that you and your work do have a place in the future of the story of fashion. Whether you're someone who has been grinding away at your business for 20 years or you're someone who's just graduated from school, there is a place for you and your work, and we're waiting to get that work from you. We need your work. Thank you so much, and thank you again to the Dutch Fashion Foundation for all the incredible work that you do. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.
Hi, Bliss.
Hey, Bliss. Hello. Oh, we're so excited to see you. Both of us.
Totally. You've been with us throughout the day, and the Netherlands have gotten to know Bliss Foster. I know I've already been introducing you to my students, but I have no idea, how big you are in the Netherlands. But you've been with us, but we were actually really curious to hear some more. Who is Bliss Foster? Where do you come from?
United States, and oh, it looked like you were about to say something. Yeah, I'm in the southern United States, and yeah, I've been here for most of my life. I've moved around a little bit, but this is mostly where I am.
But you were a stylist, is that correct?
I was a stylist for a little bit, a failed stylist. I did not do very well at that. I'm so fixated on the storytelling element of clothes that when it comes to practically kind of solving problems about people's wardrobes, I don't excel there.
So this is now what you do full time. These like analyzing catwalk shows, and what designers do. It's, okay, so got that cleared up, because for a while there you were talking about your day job, and I was always curious what your day job could be, and whenever you sleep.
Yeah. No, this is. I'm lucky enough that I get to do fashion criticism full time.
Wow.
How did you get that organized from scratch, Bliss? Can you enlighten us a bit?
Yeah. So I had been interested in doing that for a really long time, and the way that fashion journalism is kind of set up right now, it's not a very lucrative place to be. It's I mean, there are some incredible fashion journalists out there, some really good publications that put out some really incredible work, but as far as a career path, it's not very sustainable for a lot of the journalists. The pay is not very realistic, and so I just kind of figured that the only real way to get into this is to do it myself. And so I'm able to do this. A little bit of money comes in through YouTube. YouTube really doesn't pay super well, but most of this is possible because of the people that support me on Patreon. So it's just people who see what I'm doing and they like it enough that they want to support it.
How long ago did you start with your very, very first critic?
So the channel started about 2.5 years ago, and it took me a while to figure out exactly how I wanted to approach all of this. I've been doing the criticism, what you guys have seen. I've been doing that for about 2 years.
Yeah, it's a quite a remarkable new model to throw yourself out there and connect with the people and really be in dialogue constantly, and so open-minded dialogue as well. I think, we don't see that so often, so it's really inspirational for everybody.
Yeah, and especially because it's so much more than criticism, right? Because that we see a lot, and especially on YouTube, and I like this, I hate that, but you bring this whole other level of the way you talk about clothes, which I find very refreshing, and especially to throw that at my students, because you somehow rub it in. Is so fashion is super culturally relevant, and it's so important to analyze what this designer is doing and to really respect also. You bring sort of appreciation and enthusiasm that is very welcome, I think, in a time when fashion has had a very negative feel about it, right? So,
Is that so for you, Bliss? Does it have a negative feel for you?
I'm inherently very optimistic. When I look back at historic stuff, I mean, historic as in like 30 years ago, there were so many designers like Martin Margiela and Helmut Lang, and even Alexander McQueen during his really early shows. That was a period where people were kind of downing it and didn't much care for it at the time. And there were people that said that Marc Jacobs' legendary first kind of punk-inspired show, his grunge show, that received absolutely horrible criticism from the public in general, and especially fashion critics and stuff. And those designers and that show from Marc Jacobs, I mean, they've ended up being so incredibly important to the history of fashion that I try to, as much as I can, look at things now as, this will be a period, this decade that we're in right now, this will be a period where people look back in 30 years and say, wow, what a magical time that was. I would have killed to be able to be alive when that was happening. And I try to remember that it's, there aren't really bad times. The history is happening the entire time.
So yeah, we're also here to, so we have immersed you in a lot of Dutch fashion. So we've thrown a lot of information at you.
Which you beautifully captivated and gave back to us. So thank you so much for that.
Of course, yeah.
We were wondering, Bliss, if I may ask.
Yeah.
Well, we were wondering, really, do you have like a fashion designer from the Netherlands that you did not know of and now you became a fan of?
Yeah, Boss's stuff is really, I don't know if he's still sitting right over there, but Boss's stuff is really captivating. And I think that's kind of linking in with something that's happening in the zeitgeist right now, where you do fashion that is very inherently shocking. And if you're brave enough to sit with it and to kind of take it in and not give up on it and kind of take it on its own terms, there's a lot to unpack there. You guys, when you were talking to me about him, you started out by saying, like, you can kind of think about him as like kind of a Jeremy Scott. But I found that Boss was something that I had not really seen before when I actually started looking into his work. It's really interesting stuff.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, he will love that. I think he just left the building, unfortunately. Or is he there? No, he left the building, but he's on the bike right now, missing out on these fantastic remarks of you. But
I miss all the bikes in the Netherlands. I visited one time, and there are so many bikes.
That's what
just
we
a
do.
Hurricane of bikes.
Has a great influence also on the fashion we wear, because we have to bike. But
yeah.
We're here, of course, also today talking a lot, or at least thinking about the future. Like we have the old normal, and because of the COVID, and then we're also anticipating on a new normal, whatever that's going to be, and the role of designers in that. And you have already preluded on this in your video, the importance for designers to unpack their stories. So, but yeah, the new normal, what do you envision that to be?
I think that the pandemic was obviously terrible. I mean, there were lots of things about the pandemic that were awful. The primary narrative of that, of course, is that it is terrible because people were dying. But as far as just the fashion industry itself, there was kind of this wake-up call for better storytelling. And that's maybe one of the few silver linings to a cataclysmically bad thing. But the fashion industry is kind of allergic to change. We tend to be very slow to adopt anything. If you think back to e-commerce, when just about every other industry had gotten on board with selling things on the internet, there were huge fashion houses that still, like, there was no way to buy their stuff on the internet. And I think that the pandemic really gave them an opportunity to re-explore how they're telling their stories, and for some of them to have a wake-up call about whether or not they were even telling a story. Mm-hmm. And I think there were some really incredible presentations that came about where they couldn't do a typical runway show. Walter van Beirendonk, I remember, had a really good one. Y Project had a really incredible online presentation. Maison Margiela, who I obviously am a huge fan of, they started their SWALK series, which were 45-minute videos per season. They've put out 2 of these where it was basically a mini documentary about how they went from just being inspired by something to creating a full collection of clothes. And it was one of the most detailed explanations of process that I've ever seen the fashion industry produce. And I think that hopefully as things start to turn back towards normal, that there will be a lot of houses that keep those lessons and are able to move forward with them and be more public about their storytelling, because these designers are, very few of them that are on the luxury level are just coming up with pretty shapes and interesting looking jackets and then just throwing out a collection. They're taking it the full narrative route of creating a story and then expressing that story in a very interesting way through the clothes. And that story gets locked up a whole lot. I mean, I'm a fashion critic. I don't work for a major publication, and it's very difficult for me just to get a hold of something like show notes from a brand. They just are very secretive about it, and I'm not sure why. And I think maybe the pandemic might have been sort of a wake-up call to follow in the footsteps of like Gucci, or Iris van Herpen is honestly maybe the best example of this in the industry, because her show notes are very detailed, they're beautifully written, and they go up on her website every time she releases a new collection, so that you can really explore the full story of what she's trying to say. And hopefully that will be something that impacts the rest of the industry as we move forward.
And Bliss, do you feel that with the shifting dynamics right now, that the place of independent designers, what we root for, is becoming more important in the future? Can we be hopeful about that?
Yeah, there was an interesting thing that Virgil said a while back that I think gets taken out of context or taken to some weird places, but he was talking about something else and mentioned, I think streetwear is dead. And if you kind of look a little bit closer at the full statement of what he was saying, I think he was talking more about like, I think other things are going to start replacing this idea of going to, a major house and buying something that everyone is familiar with, and that there will be more of an emphasis on kind of being in the know about something. And so I think independent designers really have a place it's a better environment now than they've ever had in the past to be able to just jump in and grab hold of a market of people who want something that is very different and that you aren't going to be able to find if you just go to one of the major houses and look at the mainline stuff.
But that's also what you see with this new super fashion-loving generation, is that they're so incredibly in the know. It's like a sport, right? It's become this really fanatic type of fashion. I would say almost the Japanese way of consuming fashion, like this otaku kind of behavior. Which is, I think, this young generation has a huge effect on these big brands. Because they know that this is this main group, that this is their audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that people are getting a little bit more savvy now, and there's less of a. Ultimately, when it comes right down to it, I don't want to be too optimistic and ethereal about this. It is a reality that most of these brands are able to be funded because of an it bag, or because of selling belts with monograms on them and stuff. Those are the things that are ultimately funding a massive part of the art that all of us love. Comme des Garçons, the mainline runway shows, those likely wouldn't be able to exist if it wasn't for the collaboration with Converse that they have. But I do think that there's a growing audience within fashion that is wanting to be more plugged in and to be kind of part of a more niche group of insiders, and I think that's really cool. And those are my people.
Yeah, and what we call niche has really exploded, right? That is now maybe even more niche than not niche. Niche is so huge.
It's true. Yeah, it's huge.
So, what would you advise, Bliss, to designers who are stepping in right now, and how would you advise them to kick off from scratch?
When you're really early on, there's a lot less pressure about messing up, and that is take full advantage of the fact that you get to experiment, and the consequences of a experiment that doesn't go well are still very small. When you have a larger brand and you're carried in 16 or 20 different stores around the world, and you have to meet very strict deadlines and everything, the reality of that is that the experimentation starts to diminish a little bit. and I mean, there are some designers that have been able to have massive companies and they still do great experimental stuff. But designers now, it seems, I talk to a lot of kids on Instagram who are just starting up brands, and they want very badly to move quickly into a place where they're taken seriously and where they feel like they're kind of able to embrace the, like, I am a business owner kind of thing. And that's great. I mean, it's good to be realistic, and it's really good to have a clear head on your shoulders about what you're doing. But it's, you know, don't forget that this is that early starting phase is when you will look back on that and say, man, I really wish I had experimented more. I really wish I had taken advantage of the fact that there was just a small group of 100 people that really loved and bought my stuff, and they wanted to see me experiment, and I wish I had taken full advantage of that. So don't forget to experiment.
Could that be a full new? Oh, sorry, Mahmoud. Could that be a full new model also, to stay small and really cherish that?
Yeah, there are some designers that seem to be embracing that. It's really hard to know concretely how that works, because the designers that say that they're embracing that, like Raf Simons, has said that he doesn't really have any interest in growing the brand. I think Craig Green has publicly said that he isn't very interested in making the brand a massive venture. And, you know, at least in America, the narrative that gets said all the time is that you're either growing or you're dying. And, you know, because obviously everybody in America is very capitalistic and kind of goofy in that way. But I don't know about the logistics of that, because when companies are small enough and they say, like, oh, we want to stay small just like this, it's hard you never have actual insights into their finances. And so it's hard to say if that's a sustainable way of doing that. I run a business with the channel, but I wouldn't say that I'm the kind of business owner that maybe could give advice about that, because I wouldn't consider myself to be a super excellent business owner. But yeah, it's hard to say. I really hope that is the case, but I don't know. That would be the ideal, is that you stay small and you're able to stay very mobile, and you're able to continue to just do your true art and exactly things the way that you want to do them.
Yeah, and maybe one of the keys to that, what we see a lot is that, let's call them kids, not that they're kids, but they're collaborating a lot, right? So it is also this beehive effect almost of small economies, and they safeguard their creativity, and they have all kinds of collabs and collaborations and group projects and working with artists and performers and I don't know what, more on an equal level. Not like I'm the big star and now I need an artist and now I need this and I buy it, but it's an equal way of collaborating, and I find that very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of it's interesting. The collaboration thing, I think, mostly lives in the avant-garde and in independent designers now, because we're quickly reaching a place where collaborations from really big brands are becoming a less exciting thing. I'm trying to think of the last time there was a major collaboration.
Oh, but I was actually
really
talking about young I was actually talking about younger designers, smaller designers.
Oh yeah, no, for sure, and that's what I'm saying, is that I think that the place where collaborations should live now is with younger designers, because that's something where there's really the possibility of something interesting, whereas collaborations on a large scale have gotten very corporate at this point, and it's less about sharing ideas and coming up with something new. And so yeah, younger designers seem to be the only ones that are doing collaborations that I would say are very interesting. So yeah, I mean, I really like that's the move now, where people don't want to, make this all about the idea of the lone artist trying to, champion things all on their own. It's something where everyone kind of has this very communal thought about it. That seems like it can only result in better art for us.
Bliss, we have 1 minute and 47 seconds left as I speak. Before you go on to your Q&A with a beautiful table of designers and with the lovely Guus Beumer talking on fashion future. But can I ask you, like, really quick, as an American fashion critic, where do you place Dutch design within whatever you have already seen and whatever you have researched? What is the specific thing that you felt with Dutch fashion?
It seems like and I may be totally inaccurate here from a historic perspective, but it seems like with French designers, we'll take them as an example, there is such a long, elaborate tradition and history that I think there's a little bit of cultural pressure to kind of move in a certain way. Whereas Dutch designers, it seems to be much more free from like a cultural and like a traditional perspective. And that seems like how y'all have been able to produce designers like Boss and like Iris and stuff, where they seem to be very much writing their own script with this kind of thing. That's kind of the big advantage that I see there as far as a cultural perspective, if we're just talking about like nationalities of designers. It's really cool stuff. I'm excited to see, because y'all have students that are graduating every year. I'm excited to see what else comes out.
We're in the middle of it. And that is really exciting every year again.
Thank you so much, Bliss. We see you in a bit. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and we all love you.
Thank you so much. You both look incredible. It's so cool. I love your outfits.
I put a new outfit for you. Fong Leng, I forgot to tell you. Great design.
Oh,
You have to check her out. She's now an artist, but it's fabulous.
We're full on Dutch design.
Full Dutch design. Oh, thank you.
Bye.
On, and Angelique and Mo have asked us on this particular table. We didn't get a particular assignment. We just got a kind of open mission to reflect a little bit on, well, probably ourselves, but also, you know, what happened today, which is, of course, a privileged position to think out loud and to think in public, but it's also a very vulnerable one. So let's try to get to know each other a little bit. I know this side of the table a little bit. How about you? Very afraid. Okay, so maybe we should start to have a little round that everybody introduces themselves, and let's find out a kind of topic on the which we want to share for the next.
Yeah.
I think 23 minutes. Yeah? Okay, Gabriel, can I ask you to start?
My gosh. Thanks, Guus, putting me in the first spot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Gabriel Maher. I'm a designer, but I'm not a fashion designer. And I suppose my practice ultimately focuses on analyzing, deconstructing design itself and the act of designing, so the back end of that process. And looking at how those processes ultimately shape our genders, our sexualities, our identities, our bodies, how the body is formulated as a consequence, and all of that in relation to subjectivity, which is always sort of in relation to power. So I suppose that's where my practice sits. So it's on a deconstruction analysis sort of level. And it also looks at the mediated dimensions of that in collaboration with design. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Abstract answer?
Absolutely
Beautiful
abstract, but beautiful at the same time. Thanks, Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm Dylan Westerweel. I graduated in 2009 from Artes, and after that I won Lichting, which is the Dutch fashion design prize for young people, for the graduates. And I was supposed to show last year in 2020, but of course that got cancelled a week before due to COVID. So now I'm showing in July. My brand surrounds about telling queer stories. I really found that I never found myself my story really told in fashion. I thought that was really something that I found was missing, and now I'm starting to delve deeper into what those queer stories means to me, and as well as what other stories need to be told. Not only my own story, but what are the stories that are just literally laying in the street, but no one's looking at them. Yeah. That's what I'm doing.
Thanks, Dylan. Twan.
Yes. Hi. My name is Twan Janssen. I am an artist by how do you call it? By schooling. A few years ago, I started a fashion brand together with Mark van Vorstenbos, and we were trying to build a brand together with the customers, which was kind of new then. We had the first crowd-funded fashion brand in the world. and we're trying to do new things. So not make use of advertising, for instance. So we built our own augmented reality fashion stores inside parks around the world. So as to circumvent this whole situation of having to advertise your brand and still get an audience for it. So we did that for about 6 years, and now I'm an artist again. So everything I
And what does it mean to be an artist again?
I'm a painter, basically.
Okay.
And I write about art, and I make exhibitions with artists' work, and I own, together with Johannes Verwoerd, an app-building brand in the cultural industry.
An app-building brand.
But it's cultural all around, but it's not all fashion.
Thanks a lot.
My turn. I'm Ronald van Kemp. I started my brand, RVDK, after working in the fashion industry for 25 years. Working at the luxury level and working in New York and Paris and Milan. And I'd seen it all, and I also saw where it went wrong. So I started with my slogan, New Ethics in Luxury Fashion, talking about sustainability and inclusivity 7 years ago. And I'm very happy to see that this story is now really more relevant than ever after trying to plug it with the press and with everyone and with the stars. And my idea was to make sustainability sexy and to reach people that are not interested in the subject by addressing people with influence and by addressing the stars that sometimes even can't care less that they're wearing sustainable clothing, but then the story still gets out there. So I think, that was my goal, to reach new audiences that way, and doing it from the inside the fashion world, rather than as a sustainable brand who stands at the sideline. So this is my mission in life. Yeah.
In life. Okay, well, my name is Guus Beumer, and until a few weeks ago, I could call myself the director of the National Institute for Design and Architecture and Digital Culture, but I'm no longer there. I have no idea what title to give myself now, probably simply old and wasted. But I think it would be great if we could come up with a particular topic which we could share together, because if Angelique and Mo did something today, I think it's opening up a kind of beautiful diversity of, the notion of fashion. I think even Suzy started with the idea that, we should come up with possible new definitions. And I think, Gabriel, if something happened those last few years, is that design and therefore also fashion expanded into an enormous universe, and Bliss, I think you're one of the people who are pointing that out constantly towards us. So for instance, in the world of product design, where Gabriel comes from, you could say that the normal context was always the domestic interior. And now, if you talk to people, they operate on a planetary scale almost, and stimulated by Mr. Musk, they think about terraforming on Mars. So that goes far beyond our little domestic interior, you would say. And now we have to deal with this expansion. And I think all the positions on this table are also a reflection of this expanded reality, but that makes it also difficult to have a conversation. So I thought...
I think there was the few points that Bliss already talked about that we can reflect on. I think the subject that we talked about was a small company. Is it possible to keep a company small? And I think actually what I see is in these times of the pandemic, it was crucial for us to be as small as we were, because we were able to move along.
But Ronald, I'm so interested in the notion of small, because I remembered, the old man on the table, that Gautier had, I think, maybe 40 million turnover per year, and he was considered a very successful brand. Prada and Gucci have now 8 billion turnover per year.
Right.
So what is small? Is it Gautier of 20 years ago, or is it...
I consider myself really small.
Okay, really small.
Yeah, that's what it is.
What is really small?
Because I think fashion brands also can have a responsibility. I mean, this is how I see it.
Yeah.
I mean, fashion is a business, but it's also something that can reach audiences that no one can reach. So I see my brand as sort of a responsible brand that can reach audiences that no one else can reach. So while doing it, I don't necessarily have to be a big business. You know, it's about spreading a message and trying to be a sustainable business in itself, but also trying to tell a sustainable story. So, yeah, it's a different way of looking at what a fashion brand can be. I think we're also hooked in these mega brands that now have a real problem because they cannot adapt with the times. They are trying to be sustainable, but what they do is still trying to grow. And, you know, growing is not sustainable, it's unsustainable. So I think there needs to be a real change in how companies are built. So, yeah, what I'm trying to do is trying to find a new model for that. And it's not easy, but I think it's something that is very necessary. And I think, you know, my colleagues here are doing it all in different ways. So,
Yeah,
I think scale can be a very good topic to talk about if you talk about fashion in the future, because I think it's going to be you have to kind of make a decision on what scale you want to operate. If you want a mega company that flies models around the world and produces in Bangladesh or whatever, or if you are a one-person company that sells dresses on Instagram for one client at a time. So those are the kind of the two business models you can.
So Bliss, what do you think? Is scale the answer to you could say certain issues which have been addressed today?
Yeah, so I tend to be very pessimistic about the sustainability thing when it comes from very big brands, because I mean we have Ronald at the table, and you from the very beginning of your career, you had the priority of I want to make this sustainable and I want to not be wasteful. And there are so few leaders like that in these larger brands that I think you're right. They have kind of put themselves in a strange spot where they're now talking a lot about this idea of sustainability, but they don't have the infrastructure to support that. And I mean, especially, I mean, you know, if we talk about like Gucci or Prada, it's a totally different game when you go over to like Zara, because I mean, Zara, they can talk all they want about sustainability, but they're going to continue to pollute and cause problems in that realm for as long as they're, you know, allowed to exist as companies. There's almost no solution if that's what people are buying. So it is very refreshing. Ronald, I was very aware of you, but I wasn't as familiar with your work and your legacy and stuff. And the people at DFF were able to give me a lot of information, and it was really insightful, because whenever designers come in and they say from the beginning, this is what I have as a big priority. And it's not just that, like has anyone ever seen a sustainability brand where you walk in and they say like, you know, like everything here is made from recycled bottles or something, and you say like, I can kind of tell, like this stuff looks like it's made of recycled bottles. but then it's a whole different thing, and it's such a beautiful thing when you look at something and you say, wow, like these clothes are so beautiful, and then you find out, oh, this is all completely sustainable, and they actually have a full infrastructure to support this being a sustainable product. But at first there's that desirability, and there's the beautiful design and the storytelling and stuff. And so I don't know, huge commends to you, Ronald, for doing that kind of stuff. And hopefully there will be more brands that are starting from the very beginning. Now that the sustainability thing has become more of a public conversation, there will be more brands that start from the very beginning saying this is going to be a priority no matter how big we get.
But how do you think like the bigger brands can do this? Like you're mentioning a Prada, or I was just teaching at Design Academy in Eindhoven, and they did a project with all the fake fur that Prada used for their show. Well, fake fur being one of the most polluting fabrics in the world, you know, and then trying to work with students to make it look like something else, you know, to give it a positive edge, but still it's there, and it's there, it's very present, and somehow they don't seem to care, and it seems like journalists doesn't care, and I don't know, but people start to care. So I think, how is that change going to happen, in your opinion?
And this is where kind of my pessimism comes in, is that ultimately there, and I have a theory, and I want to qualify that I have no scientific credentials at all. Sustainability ultimately is something that is a scientific topic. But my running theory personally is that the waste that's produced by all of the participants of Paris Fashion Week in a single season is maybe 1% of the amount of waste that Zara will create over the course of this quarter. And that the really huge issues are coming from these fast fashion brands that are selling you things with the intention of them being worn once or twice and then being thrown in the trash. And I think the only real way to move forward with that kind of stuff is to litigate it and to create laws where you aren't allowed to just create stuff that is meant to be thrown away in droves and that we're just filling up landfills with. I tend to get very pessimistic that there's going to be any kind of cultural solution to that, because ultimately these companies were founded on the idea of we are going to make as much money as is humanly possible. And the way to make money is to keep selling people things and to make them think that they need to refresh their wardrobes every 4 weeks. So I don't know, it seems like the only solution for that level of a problem is to make laws about it.
Yeah, but don't you think that luxury fashion took over that whole concept? Chanel started with that, and then everyone else followed. I mean, Lagerfeld had the finger on the pulse. He knew what was going on. He knew it was a successful business model. So, and this is where the problem is. So I think we shouldn't ignore luxury fashion in that, because there's also this example. We give an example. So
you're saying that Carl led the idea of continuously refreshing the wardrobe and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the many collections and the constant need for excitement and newness and flying people everywhere and creating shows that,
Notwithstanding my own personal interest in your conversation, but I was thinking there's a little bit of symbolically a kind of split on this table. Eh? Yeah. And I think you two, including me, represent a kind of, you could say, kind of media reflective relationship towards fashion. I think you're both coming out of that particular idea, that particular notion of Dutchness, which was introduced in the 90s. While you two come from, you could say, an expanded vision on fashion. And to be honest, I'm a little bit intrigued, maybe because I represent the media reflective position, to step into that particular idea of expansion, because there's been such a red thread in the conversations of today. Yeah. And you deliberately introduced the notion of deconstruction and going back to a notion of the body. Yeah. And you come up with a notion of narrative and narration and introduce that to a variety of, I think your collection is no longer about communication, but it's about, at least storytelling. Let's call it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my work is about storytelling, but as well, I want to talk about skill as well, because I think I'm the smallest of all of us here. I'm not the smallest, but I work by myself and with my boyfriend.
Hey,
that's
all a good thing, dear man.
And I'm very happy to work that way as well. And I was really, before the pandemic, I was really focused on being like, okay, I'm going to make it, I'm going to do it, and this is the way I'm going to do it. I do collections because that's the way it's supposed to be. And now I'm reflecting, because I couldn't show, and I'm showing 9 months later, and I was supposed to do my show. I'm reflecting and thinking, this is not the way that I want to expand my business, or the way I want to move forward. I want to tell my stories in my time. I want to have the time to reflect on the textiles I make,
That's expanding too,
That's expanding, but it's expanding in my head, but it's not expanding in the way that we all think that we should expand as a brand. But I think it was so helpful for me to realize that I don't have a place in that, 2-4 shows a year. I don't have a place in that anymore. For me, it's just, I think that I can tell stories that need to be told, and maybe it's just in my crazy head that I think that that's the way it is, but that's what I feel it needs to be done for me right now. And I think that's something that's a lot in my generation. People are just fed up with the idea that we are pushed into this system where you have to work at Balenciaga or otherwise you failed. No, it's all right. It's all right. Okay, well, I'll go now. No, but I think it's a really nice. I mean, we had a table here earlier with a lot of young designers as well, and it's really nice to see that everyone's just fed up with that whole idea that it just needs to be. You need to go to Dior. You need to go to Balenciaga. No, find your own path, find your story, just try it. And Bliss was saying it as well. Take time for experimentation. I can do whatever I want right now because I don't have any responsibilities to anyone else except to myself. And I think that's very lovely and free. And I know it's not something for the long haul, maybe.
Why not?
I don't know.
Okay.
Time will tell.
Time will tell. We'll see.
Let me ask you something. You know, you could say that in certain storylines, clothes have the kind of central position.
Yeah.
Is that also with you?
Well, I always...
Clothes become set pieces or of bigger narrations?
Yeah, for me, it's really... I always start with like a big philosophical research moment. I read for like a month until I start thinking about clothing because I really want to feel someone's story. Like if I'm telling a story about Nijinsky, if I'm telling a story about the Ballet Russe as a whole, or like rent boys in Victorian age London, I really want to know who these people are because I want to know how would their clothes look? Are they going to be brand new? Are they going to be worn? And that perspective makes me start a collection. And I don't want to make a beautiful white shirt. I'm bored with a beautiful white shirt. Why can I wear it just as like a little scarf, as a shawl, just came out of the shower, ooh, my boyfriend is waiting in the bedroom. I think that's, to me, is way more exciting.
Yeah. But you think in terms of, okay, you start with being informed, but then you translate it into garments, or okay?
Yeah, for now. Well, that's what I did for this collection that's coming out now. But now that I'm rethinking it for my next collection, I want to move away from that.
Okay.
Because I really.
And why do you want to move away from that?
Because I think I was. After winning Lichting, there was like this whole thing happening to me. It's like, oh wow, you're a successful designer now. Which is bullshit. But, and I just started doing like, okay, I'm going to make a collection. I make a collection of 20 outfits and la. And when I finished, I was like, I'm very happy with the collection, but I just made a collection of 20 looks. And now I'm just like, what does it mean for me that I have a collection of 20 looks? I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the results, but I would be way more happy if I had the knowledge that I have now when I started this new collection.
And do you have any idea, the last question, how you would, employ that type of knowledge which you have gathered now for your next collection?
Yeah, for my next work, I'm really focusing on having the process be as important as the final product. So I really want to delve into. I do a lot of handwork in my collections, and a lot of embroidery, a lot of like really old, boring stuff, but that makes me very happy. And I really want to make that whole process of researching, finding my new knowledge in fabric and in coloring and in detailing as important as the final collection. Okay. So maybe that could be a sculpture, but maybe it will just be a collection in the end. Who knows?
We'll be curious. Gabriel, being suddenly part of this fashion conversation, it must have been also a little bit surprising for you because it's not, you could say, your natural habitat. But one thing is, of course, you could say very fundamental in that conversation. That is, you could say, the human figure or the human body. You are part of a discourse who questions this centralized position of your so-called human. First by deconstructing it, but also secondly by stating that maybe this notion of the human, is part of the problem if we discuss notions of durability and so on and so on. Because everything is subjugated under that particular perspective. Everything. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and what it means for your own practice, I would say?
Yeah. I mean, thanks for the question also. I suppose I really start to think about it on the level of how the notion of the human, the livable life, how the body that is sort of idealized or part of a dominant narrative, let's say, is produced and reproduced over and over.
Well, look at fashion.
Yes, exactly. Quite often on a mainstream level in very limited form. So I think what I find also really interesting about being a part of this panel, while I'm not a fashion designer, I think the discussion around storytelling and narrative, like Dylan, you also mentioned when you first introduced, like the fact that we're also in this expanded sort of moment, but also in this moment where visibility of lives, communities, queer bodies,
Yeah.
and bodies outside this sort of norm are actually sort of like plying and moving into these kinds of spaces as well. And I think there's some interesting questions here when it comes to this sort of process opening up and expanding, when that sort of becomes subsumed by market. So I'm really intrigued also by that, how these dimensions will sort of expand and open a space. Also, in terms of acknowledging the crucial conversation around sustainability as well, and new ethics, it's opening and stretching a space, but when the market sort of becomes involved, how does it become subsumed? How do we also start to maintain and manage a balance with this?
What I think might be part of the problem is that fashion will always eat up a certain cool subjects for the season, like sustainability or gender fluidity or what have you. And then the next season, they don't care about it anymore, because that's the way fashion works. It has to feed itself on new subjects, basically. And they nibbled on subjects that other groups in society were actually eating. So they're coming to a plate and say, oh, I'll have a nibble of that, and put it back on the plate. And then they took the limelight away from these organizations that are actually working on the problem. So in a way, fashion is not solving anything. It's doing a disservice to certain things that they say they pay lip service to, basically, by eating it up and consuming it and having their way with it.
Twan, you are referring to a kind of, you could say, tradition within fashion to translate everything in trends and a notion of actuality.
It's cowboys.
And the whole point of trends is, of course, that it, you could say, depoliticizes. Huh? So I think we invented the notion of trends to be able to depoliticize. It didn't reflect a future, it changed a notion of future. And that's, I think, very interesting when you look at trends. But if you listen to today, either we are all extremely naive, people are not so much seeing themselves as a reflection of a trend or whatever, maybe that's pure naivety, but they seem to be taking positions.
Oh, it's
as if
genuine.
they introduce a kind of political element again, you know, and you translate it into the notion of ethics, which is, of course, a completely different domain. But politics seem to be.
But maybe that's why I was interested in talking about scale, because up to a certain scale, you can afford these. Working with these things on a small and personal scale with a group of customers that are on your side in this position.
But that was your practice and you finished it. I'm sorry, I have to be a bit blunt.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
we were ahead of time. We were ahead of time, if you would put it positively. We ran out of oil.
Realistically?
Well, we ran a business for 7 years out of our home, and we had we were lovers at the same time, which wasn't a very good combination. And so artistically it was a success, like financially in the end it wasn't sustainable in that sense.
So do you think it's still a model which could be, you know, made use of? Huh?
It had elements that are being used right now, I think.
Which one? The notion of community, or?
The notion of community. You can buy a pair of socks without being part of a family, if I believe my emails. So it's become a very part of the fabric and also the storytelling. It's part of the fabric of fashion now. Yeah. But I think it only works when it's real. When it's real, when it's not about telling a story, it's about being a story. So if you live your beliefs, then you can only touch people if you show yourself to be touched yourself. So, and then I come back to scale. Like when you are doing everything with a small group or alone, then it's very easy. It's easier to keep it on a personal level. And how more people, like the bigger the group gets, it gets diluted and it gets. other things get in the way of the original idea.
But I think it's a beautiful notion, scale. In the 60s, it was even celebrated. Small is beautiful, and so on. And so on.
Yeah.
So maybe it is a notion which we need to reinvestigate again.
Well, it is being. I think it is being embraced right now by the current generation when they have an Instagram account and they make one dress and one person in Japan is buying it. They have a market, you know. It's like one product, one market. That's also sustainability. That's also fashion in my sense, in my mind.
Oh, I'm sure it's fashion. I'm not sure if it's sustainability, but for instance, for the designer themselves. But yeah, I think it's also vulnerable.
Why not? Why wouldn't it be? It's not for the industry.
I didn't look.
I agree.
I didn't look into the.
It's not sustainable for the industry. I agree with that, but for the designer.
Hey, Twan, maybe this is a question for all of us. 20 years ago, Angelique and a group of people decided to introduce the Dutch Fashion Foundation. There are certain things which are very specific for that moment. For instance, the notion of Dutchness, and the notion of nationality, which is still very much linked to that particular day and idea, maybe now less important. So let's celebrate also that specific moment, I would say. Yeah. And what was attempted was to create a kind of platform through which a variety of designers, which would normally never meet because they were all locked up in their brands and their little ambitions, you know, could share and have certain dialogues and maybe organize things together and yeah, be bigger than themselves. That's maybe the whole point. But if I listened to a few conversations today also from Arnhem, is that we need other support structures. Is there a support structure which is very specific to the notion of staying small?
I think the problem with the support in Holland that it always stays very local. Like they don't look across the border and the people that advise are not international. So I think Dutch fashion needs to be much more going towards the outside. It's very much centered
but
locally.
It looks as if you're talking policy now. Is that true?
I'm talking about the support system and about what happens with the support.
Yeah. But the support I thought was mentioning was not so much in financial terms or infrastructural terms or economic terms. It was recognizing a notion of locality and psychology almost more. So I thought, okay, that's a completely different type of support which seems to be necessary. And maybe coming out of notions of care, which is another word which seems to be very popular at the moment.
Well, the support I think that needs to be done is telling Dutch fashion schools need to tell. And I don't know for all, but we need to know where we come from. We need to know our privilege in the Netherlands. We need to know that we're super privileged to be here sitting at this table as well. And I think one thing we were talking about scale as well, and maybe about ethics, I think it's very important to learn in Dutch fashion schools the decolonization of fashion, to think about that it's not okay to just be randomly inspired by an Indian tribe or whatever. I think that's something that I wanted to say as well about scale and about like expanding and about big brands. I think it's so easy to be inspired but not really work or think about where you're just literally taking the material. You're saying as well, you're just taking a little nibble, but you don't give the money back to where you actually have the little nibble from. And I think that's something that's really important to see for for Dutch fashion schools in particular. I mean, I went to one. We need to stop. We need to stop having it as an okay idea that you can just take from some culture for someone or just be randomly inspired and not meaning anything that you're inspired by them. That's something that I think is the way that we need to move forward. Yeah. And I think that's caring as well. Mm-hmm.
I have to look at you, Bliss. Do you want to add something to this particular conversation or the thing which didn't said?
So this is one where I was kind of looking.
Were you just floating away? Sorry for this.
Totally distracted. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. No, I was really interested in what our two designers had to say about that, because that's something where I often, like, my head will inflate a little bit and I'll think that I have a really solid opinion about that, but I don't. I think the two people at the table where they're actual boots on the ground, that's where the real insight here can come from. So I really appreciate both of y'all sharing your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Bliss. But yeah, no.
Sorry to interrupt. Oh my God. Too quick off the mark. No, I really also want to second that. And also, I think in terms of narrative, it's about like who is telling the story, in fact. Mm-hmm. And also, there really needs to be support in that process of how to position and how to understand the positions and the privileges that are sort of being occupied and being taken up, and the spaces that are being claimed. So I think that is starting at an educational level, and that needs to permeate also ultimately in terms of enacting care inside the school systems. Yeah. That's on all school system levels, from all design school system levels. I think that's also something that really needs to be practiced from the level of how do we educate new designers coming up? How is care, kindness, like in the way we critique and feedback and support flourishing of students ultimately as well, just to bring the pedagogic frame in there. That kind of support.
Well, I think we have just a few minutes left, and which is a pity because I think we're just warming up a little bit. But I'm sorry to put you in the media reflective corner, Twan. I mean, I didn't want to sound degrading.
Oh no, well.
No, but I thought it was
I didn't take it that way. No.
Coincidental kind of organization. Hey, just to go back to also what Ronald called, this notion of support and infrastructure. I think Pascal was very adamant in saying, look, fashion doesn't make me happy, even if you're successful. Look at Alexander McQueen, something odd happens to you. Could you say, can we give a little bit of advice back to the Dutch Fashion Foundation?
Take it away.
I think fashion has no borders. That's all
they
I'm
organized
saying.
this day. Maybe we should give something back.
My thing is fashion has no borders. So I think that's one of the most important things, especially right now. But
yeah. Okay. So in other words, the support should also be borderless.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and we have a responsibility also as designers, because, like I said, we have a big reach and we should use it positively. That was it.
Okay, well, that was it. I think we're over time now. Thank you very much for joining this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Take care.
If that's the case, then it's time to party, no?
Party?
Have a birthday girl.
Hey, birthday girl.
You were like, amazing idea. Congratulations.
Thanks, Bliss.
Congratulations. Thank you.
We're going to have drinkies and we're going to leave you alone and desolate in your own little private house.
Thank you, Bliss.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We will follow you all.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Dankjewel, Ronald. Dankjewel, Twan.
Dank jullie wel allemaal, hè?
Dankjewel.
Zijn we eruit, ja?
Look how beautiful. Oh my God.
Oh, damn it. Look at that now. Look at that.
Wow.